Payday was once a game that felt like it had passion, and though at times stumbling, at times a bit misguided, it felt like it was a game about having fun and creating new experiences and making friends. However, the current Payday is one that has lost sight of that, instead choosing to go down the path of greed. After facing the consequences of their actions, the game is basically all but dead, losing almost all of its players to other games, or even their own previous game, Payday 2. Now, the devs have made promises to deliver on big changes in their Operation Medic Bag that will hopefully turn the game around. At a glance, it appears to be a promising initiative, but upon closer inspection, perhaps this is just another attempt to appease the players without actually having the consumer's best interests at heart. Of course, I'll cover in great detail why this is the case, but I also want to focus on just what went wrong with Payday 3 as a whole. What happened? What caused it to fail? And more importantly, how can the devs learn from this to avoid repeating the same mistake? So as you can probably tell by the sheer length of this video, there's a lot to discuss, and to make it a bit easier to understand, I'm going to try to break this down into 3 broader sections. First is the pricing, how poor the value is for the amount that you're paying, how predatory the pricing and the various bundles are, and how possibly they even lied to the consumers. Second, we're going to be focusing on the game's updates, or the lack thereof. How attempts to fix the game and add quality of life have been extremely lackluster, and at times, straight up insulting. Third, this video is going to cover the content additions being added to this game, why so far it hasn't helped to bring players back, and why I believe the game is still heading down the wrong direction. I'm going to try to organize this video as best as I can so I don't waste any of you guys' time. But there's a lot that needs to be unpacked here. I'll make chapters for the video, I'll also be linking any content I use as reference down in the description or as a card. Now, let's begin. So let's give a quick recap for those that are out of the loop. Payday 3 released back in September of 2023, and it had one of the most disastrous launches of any video game ever. The game's dedicated servers could not handle the influx of players trying to get on the game, and since it had online-only requirements, that means that Payday 3 was completely unplayable for the first few days after release. However, even after the dust settled and players were able to log in and play the game, many people started to realize that there were more problems under the surface than anticipated. The game was bland, it was lacking content, and in dire need of quality of life. Many fans simply quit, or they went back to playing Payday 2 instead. The developers needed to take action, but even after a couple of extremely delayed updates, the game today is still largely the same as it was during the release. Meanwhile, Payday 3's latest DLC, Syntax Error, is the first of 4 paid DLC laid out by a DLC roadmap, and instead of it being a welcome update, players are instead in uproar over being sold DLC this early into the game's lifecycle, while basic features and functionality are still missing from the game. The prices themselves are nothing short of excessive. Here's a list of all the prices for the DLC, as well as all the other stuff available for the game. This type of pricing is clearly pushing you toward the increased investment in the higher upfront purchases. The DLC bundle being cheaper than buying the DLC separately, the gold edition being cheaper than buying the bundle, or same with the silver. This in itself is fairly predatory since bigger investments are incentivized while not necessarily providing more value. For example, I don't care about the Tailor packs at all, but since it's better perceived value to get the heist and the weapons in the bundle, you may as well spend a little extra to get the bundle. Same with the gold edition. The perceived value of the DLCs is better in these season passes than if you were to wait and buy the bundle separately. However, with the gold and silver editions, this is essentially pre-ordering DLC. You buy for things you don't see yet, and you won't know the quality of until they come out. And these additions of the game also make it much harder for people to do things like refund the game if you find that, down the line, you're not happy with the future DLC. But, this isn't exactly a new tactic, and many games employ this type of pricing. Not that it makes it any better, but it is still worth pointing out. Now, I want to focus on the DLC prices themselves, and the actual value that you're getting out of it. Some people aren't really convinced that these prices are bad, and I want to do some straight dollar-to-dollar comparisons. let's take a quick trip down memory lane and compare the Payday 3 prices with some of the old Payday 2 stuff. Specifically, let's compare the heists. So, wow, I actually totally forgot just how many heists we got, and so many of them were just straight up free. Diamond Store, the very first heist we got, free. Not the most amazing, but hey, it was free. First annual Payday Halloween special, that was, I believe, Safe House Nightmare, looking from the date. Armored Transport, so this was the first paid DLC of heist that we got. It definitely wasn't $4, but let's just take a look at what it had to offer. It also didn't have 2 heists. It had technically 4/5 heists. Okay, it had multiple heists, 1 primary weapon, 2 secondary weapons, 16 weapon modifications, 4 mask materials and patterns, and 11 unlockable achievements. And like I said, it's not $4. At the time, it was something else, and I had to go look it up. It was actually sold for $7. So, Armored Transport is not the most memorable of heists, but it did still come with a pretty meaty package, all things considered. Let's keep going. After that, we have the Charlie Santa heist, if you guys remember that. That is Go Bank, free. Election Day, and this is a 3-day heist. Technically, it's more of a 2-day, but it's a 3-day heist, free, and I think this is probably one of the better ones too. Shadow Raid, one of Payday 2's most iconic heists. Yes, it was stealth only, but it was huge, it was infinitely replayable, and there were so many different things you could do. It was not linear at all. You could choose however you wanted to play, and that was awesome. Free. Big Bank, one of Payday 2's most iconic heists, bar none. It had amazing pre-planning, multiple ways to do objectives and escapes, and it all came at, well, not $4. This one was also $7. Let's see what it offered. 1 contract, and not just any contractor. This was Giancarlo Esposito. 1 heist, 1 primary weapon, 9 weapon modifications, 4 mask materials and patterns, 2 songs, and 10 achievements. Hell, and we can just keep going. Hotline Miami, that one also not $4, but let's just see the type of package it had. 1 heist, a 2-day heist, 3 secondary weapons, 15 weapon modifications, 4 melee weapons, 4 mask materials and patterns, 2 songs, and 7 unlockable achievements. Meanwhile, syntax error for just the heist alone costs $10. That is without cosmetics, no weapons, nothing, just the heist itself. And also, one of the things that we do have to consider is that a lot of these old heists were quite some time ago. I had to also look that up. So Big Bank released in June of 2014. So let's account for inflation, shall we? $7 for a heist back then for one of the greatest heists that we've ever had, in my opinion, would have the buying power of $9.02 today. I don't think I can get, I can't get December, but November, close enough, $9.02. And that also does not include all of the extra goodies that we got within that package, and with all those packages that came in the early days of Payday 2 DLC. So as you can see, not only did the prices for the DLC increase, but we also drastically lost value as well. Now, that's not to say that Payday 2 wasn't greedy on its own. It wasn't known as DLC Day 2 for nothing, and especially during the later days of the game's lifecycle, it used the exact same DLC structure as seen in Payday 3. And those prices also increased too, but it was never quite as high as it is now. The quality of the Payday 3 DLC doesn't really make sense with the price increase. I did a full review of the DLC if you'd like to know more about it, but basically it boils down to this. For the heist, yeah, it's probably one of the better heists in Payday 3, but that's a very low bar to hurdle. It still lacks actual replayability, meaning it's fun maybe the first time playing through, but after 3 or 4 runs, you've basically seen all there is to see. There's nothing actually new or unique offered by the heist. The weapons, they're basic, but a few of them are conveniently overpowered. And I'll talk about this later in the video, but it's clear that the main purpose of the weapons is just to fill the empty holes of the base game. The Tailor Pack is also surprisingly lacking. I mean, the actual cosmetics themselves, they look pretty good, but only recently did I realize that they lack actual customizability like their Payday 2 counterparts. In Payday 2, Tailor Packs still allowed you to customize masks if you wanted to, and most of the suit skins usually came with different colors or variants, both of which are missing from Payday 3. As far as I can see, there's nothing to justify the increase in prices from a pure value standpoint. Now, so far I've been focusing on the Syntax Error DLC and its individual prices. What if there are people out there that do believe the DLC looks good and believes it's genuinely worth the money? In that situation, they'd also look toward the silver and the gold editions of the game instead, right? Even if it is predatory, it is still the cheapest way to obtain the DLC. The Syntax Error bundle goes for $18, while the gold edition is normally worth $90. But if we subtract the base game price of $40, that leaves $50 for the 4 DLC planned to release in the future that have a worth of $12.50 each, making it the best value of the bunch. But there's a pretty big problem with that. There are a lot of people out there that bought the base game of Payday 3 and only plan to upgrade down the line when the DLC came out so they can make a more accurate judgment on its worth. And by all means, that's a smart move. But for whatever reason, Payday 3 does not offer any way to upgrade a base game purchase to either the silver or gold editions. And at the time of making this video, that option is still not available. I enlisted the help of a friend from my Discord server just to confirm that if you have the base game, there is no way to upgrade to these silver or gold editions. That means that your only option to buy a DLC is to go with the overpriced route. The crazy thing is, I was almost certain it was mentioned before in FAQs or streams that such an upgrade would be made available, but when I checked the FAQ, it wasn't there. At first I thought I was going crazy, so I ended up looking an archive version of the FAQ and found out that actually I wasn't. This is a version of the FAQ one day after the game's release, so September 22nd of 2023, and as you can see, the question is answered right here. Turns out, for whatever reason, the question about letting players upgrade their versions of the game was removed, not even 1 full week later. Now, as far as I know, I don't believe there was any official news retracting this offer, and I couldn't find anything when searching for answers. The one place I haven't really looked yet is the dozens of streams that the developers do, which apparently is the way they prefer to convey news to the community now instead of changelogs. And my own viewers have reprimanded me for not getting information right because, well, it was mentioned in a stream, but not elsewhere. Look, I'm just trying to cover my ass here. Perhaps this is a change that was mentioned but was not made very public. Or perhaps this really was just a silent change that was supposed to go under the radar. The point being is that Payday 3 has gone back on its stance for upgradability, meaning people that have bought the base game are the main victims of this weird and new anti-consumer practice. Well, it's new to me anyway. Leaving them with only the option to buy an overpriced version of the DLC and no other choice. But hold on, GeneralMcBadass, how can you call the game greedy? Payday 3 went on a huge 25% off sale during the last holiday season in December 2023, and at the time of making this video, I even discovered that it's having a Plyon publisher sale for an even bigger 35% off. Now, I gotta admit, that's a pretty hefty sale. The first sale coming in when the game was only out for 2 months, and now this sale when the game has been out for 4 months. But rather than a sale, perhaps this is a more accurate representation of what the game's intended price is. Maybe Payday 3 was even meant to be free to play. At the end of the day, the real money maker of Payday was never the game itself, but rather the absurd amount of DLC there is and how much people bought those. It's the reason why, when Payday 2 goes on sale, it's dirt cheap, while the accumulation of DLC amounts to something pretty horrendous. The funny thing is, despite the base game and the silver and gold editions going on sale both times, the Syntax Error DLC did not go on sale. They were the same absurd prices that they are now. This further emphasizes the absurdity of the pricing for people who only bought the base game. They can't upgrade to the silver or gold editions. They are physically unable to get these upgraded versions for sale, and the Syntax Error DLC refuses to go on sale as well. Rather than these sales being acts of goodwill, it seems to me like they're acts of desperation. Ones that haven't really worked considering there's no discernible increase in people playing the game. After all, just because the price dropped doesn't all of a sudden fix the problems present in the game. But perhaps in a world where the gaming industry is dominated by Battle passes, season passes, microtransactions, and overpriced cosmetics, surely this makes the DLC prices okay? No, it does not, and let me explain why. Let's take a look at one of those games out there with said overpriced cosmetics. Halo Infinite, a game that, at launch, shared many similarities as Payday 3. The game was clearly lacking content, missing essential playlists found in previous games, and it used a leveling system based entirely on challenges. Sounds similar, right? So what changed? Well, not the microtransaction prices, I can tell you that much. But as someone coming back to the game after 3 years, the game feels way better now. There are more maps to play, way more game modes to choose from, and the leveling system also shifted focus away from the challenges. Now the majority of EXP is gained from simply playing the game. And you also get rewarded for various things such as being on the winning team or doing well and performing better. Not only can I play all of these new maps and game modes, I can even access all of the new features such as Forge and custom maps, all without having spent a single dollar on the game. The PvP of Halo Infinite is free to play. You see, there's always a give and take for these situations. Just because Halo Infinite has battle passes and pretty absurd MTX prices of its own, doesn't all of a sudden make it okay for a game like Payday 3 to similarly charge absurd prices for their own DLC. There has to be some sort of justification. Payday's DLC model uses the pay-to-play model. That is, you have to pay to play the content that's being added, and that's starting to become a much more rare method of monetization. I think most game companies have caught on that it's just not friendly to the players. It splits the player base because those that haven't paid can't access the content, causing a divide between those that have paid and those that haven't. It also makes it extremely difficult for newcomers to the game or even returning players coming back. Both of these groups can't just pick up the game and start having fun. They have to be convinced to buy the game and then buy the additional content before they can have fun. And as displayed in the case of Payday 2, that cost can be insane. Halo Infinite does monetization by being free to play, while having microtransaction cosmetics and a seasonal battle pass. Which is kind of funny because Payday 3 is so proud not to have a battle pass that it even says so on the FAQ. But in the exact same breath, it so shamelessly says that they're glad to add it if we want it. So what's the lesson to be learned here? That Payday 3 has a chance to improve like Halo Infinite did, so long as it's given enough time to add content, as well as tone down the prices and make it fair? Maybe not. Let's take a look at another game, one that's much more similar to Payday 3. It's a co-op game, it faced similar issues at its own launch, and it just so happens to also be developed by a Swedish game studio. Warhammer Darktide. Again, this is a game that came out incomplete, lacking in content, no polish, and clearly focused on selling cosmetics in their microtransaction store. Like Payday, Darktide is a co-op game heavily inspired by Left 4 Dead, so they have a lot of similar mechanics. Now, I wasn't an early player of Darktide, so I won't pretend to understand all the problems I had before, but playing the game now, I can definitely say it's very fun. The game itself just has so much charm. The music is kick-ass, the setting is very cool, and the aesthetic definitely feels like the Warhammer 40k universe. And one thing that Darktide does very well that is clearly missing in Payday 3 is characters interacting with the world. They talk to each other. They talk about the set pieces they encounter. Or hell, they even talk to their mission coordinators. It's honestly pretty great. Then again, nothing quite compares to how good the voice lines and characters were of Vermintide. I dare say no game compares. Each of those characters had their own personalities, their own backgrounds, motivations, and they bounced off each other differently because of it. I mean, nothing will be quite as iconic as the Knife Ears calling everyone Lumberfoot, or the dwarf speaking in his dwarven language so much and calling every one of his friends Drangbrazi. I mean, Holy Sigma, bless this ravaged body, was the equivalent of, I need a medic bag. If anyone needs a voice actor, I'm available for hire. But seriously, getting back on track here. Ultimately, the reason why I brought up Darktide is because, well, I'm a longtime player of Vermintide. Between Vermintide 1 and 2, I have over 800 hours. And even though I only started playing Darktide in 2024, which is a good year after its release, I think I have a decent amount of experience when I say this. Darktide, as it is currently, does a pretty good job of balancing the fact that the game feels very much like its spiritual predecessor, but at the same time, it changes enough to feel like a new game. For the new stuff, all the guns, the gun focus, the toughness mechanic, the builds, the enemies, and the tactics for dealing with them, it's very welcome and very fresh. But simultaneously, it feels like the game just took what was good about Vermintide and brought it over, or enhanced it. Meanwhile, Payday 3 doesn't. It took so many things and mechanics present in Payday 2 and Payday the Heist, and then just threw them away. The game shows clear signs of regression in a number of areas, for no particularly good reason. Let's take a look at some of those regressions. Dominating enemies has been a thing since Payday the Heist, and in Payday 3 it was decided that you won't be able to dominate enemies without having invested in a skill, meaning you also can't yell at them like you used to. So how did they deal with that for the pre-assault guards on the map? Random. They randomly surrender. You have no way to influence whether or not they give up. In fact, they can be shooting at you in the back of the head and they will just randomly put their hands up and give up for no apparent reason. Why was melee randomly ruined? Not only are there no melee skills and no melee weapons now, but even the default weapon bash was changed to deal no damage. Why? For what purpose? This game's new weapon system is already really restrictive. Your secondary is only a bunch of pistols, no SMGs or shotguns like in Payday 2. Hell, even in Payday the Heist, you could carry 3 weapons, and with the very limited amount of skills right now to buff them, they're basically an afterthought except for the revolvers, meaning that 80% of the time or more, you're relying on your primary alone, which hampers a lot of the weapon variety as it is. This one I've been apprehensive to talk about, but the more I play, the more I feel like this is turning out to be a negative. What's up with the new armor system? The old system was the same for Payday the Heist and Payday 2, and then it got changed to this new system where, mechanically, it doesn't offer anything for gameplay. With the old armor, you use it as a temporary shield. You can be bold when you had it up, do objectives, revive a teammate, and with the way skills work, you could beef it up for super good sustain, become a real tank, and use it for objectives and such. Or you could have gone with a dodge build. Your armor becomes paper thin, but you get crazy mobility and a different form of survivability. Now the Payday 3 armor system is functionally the same for everyone. Sure, there's a few different levels of armor, but there's no reason to use light armor unless you do stealth. Everyone has the same armor and plays with it in the exact same way. It feels like the Battle Royale armor or shield mechanic, like Fortnite or Apex Legends or Call of Duty Warzone. It's functionally just a second health bar. And for Payday 3, it also means that we have a new consumable that we have to spec into, without adding anything meaningful in terms of gameplay. And probably one of the most egregious things, Payday 3 just doesn't feel like a heisting game anymore. This is not something that only started with Payday 3, but the issue has definitely compounded exponentially with the release of the third game. In Payday 3, you can feel like a real heister by sitting in circles to hack the Wi-Fi. This happens on multiple occasions. Yippee! The escapes in a heist movie are supposed to be clean, discreet. You know, that's the thing about heists. It's about the plan, it's about the ingenuity or the creativity. In Payday 3, half of the game's escapes are just some chopper sitting in a static location while a bunch of enemies spawn right next to it. Pre-planning. Not only was it removed from the game, but buying favors became harder than buying weapon skins. When a civ gets helped up once, that's it. Nothing you can do, can't yell at them, can't get them back down, can't even kill them. They're absolutely free. I understand that logically, in my head, this may be a conscious balancing decision. But the game has an entire mechanic and skill tree revolving around civilians, and this takes both the control aspect and the immersion right out of it. And the overkill weapon mechanic, I don't even know what they were thinking. This is basically a blatant ripoff of the Call of Duty care package kill streak, but it feels so out of place in a game about heisting. Now, I'm not saying that Payday 3 consists solely of regression. There's a few things I can honestly defend about the game. The new stealth and stealth mechanics, while a bit abusable and sometimes very goofy, they're very much improved, and would honestly be a way bigger highlight if heists had better replayability and variety for the sake of utilizing said stealth. As mentioned, there's also the new mechanic to hold up civilian hostages, and they even built up skills around it. However, I feel like, the implementation isn't quite right, since it should feel a little more natural to use during a heist, and not have to worry about losing all your hostages in the first 2 minutes, because that's just how it normally goes. And building around it with skills should feel a little bit more rewarding, but, otherwise it totally fits in line for a game about heisting. See, the problem is that the few additions that Payday 3 got that are well received are bogged down by other issues, and they also don't outweigh the things that were lost. And it's especially telling when most of the people that support the game can really only mention that Payday 3 has good shooting mechanics. But a proper game engine and some solid shooting mechanics are, in my opinion, the bare minimum for a modern game. What else does it have to separate itself from the other first-person shooters out there, or the other co-op games? Instead of aligning itself more with its own identity, it seems like the game wanted to become more generic. Now this time, let's take a look at not an old game that recently became better, but actually a recent game, one that's catching a lot of buzz and is putting a lot of other games to shame, like Payday 3. And hey look, it's yet another game made by a Swedish game studio. What are those Swedes doing out there? Helldivers 2. Now, of course, to address the elephant in the room, yes, Helldivers 2 is also suffering from server issues, just like Payday 3 did at the time of making this video. But there's some very big differences. Payday 3's server issues meant the game was literally unplayable, and even later, when people could play the game, they realized that it was a half-complete game that lacked content, it lacked quality of life, and it just felt like a regression from its previous game. Helldivers 2, yeah, it had server issues, but that's because the game is too damn popular. The game is still technically very playable, just gotta get lucky enough to get in, because everyone else is trying to get in. And the game itself is a complete 180 from Payday 3. It feels complete, with wonderful attention to detail from the sound design, the environment design, enemy design. The gameplay loop is fun and satisfying. It's got some really good replayability, both things that Payday 3 is clearly lacking. I mean, the game almost feels completely different when you fight the bugs and when you fight the automatons. And the cherry on top, the game has almost every feature that Payday 3 is trying to add through its Operation Medic bag, all built into the game since day one. Unreadying, quick play, co-op features, voice chat, you name it. Unfortunately, this game also doesn't have an offline mode, but neither do any of the other ones I mentioned earlier. But, considering how every other aspect of this game blows Payday 3 out of the water, I think it's still worth using as a comparison. And like Darktide, Helldivers 2, it just has so much charm. It's obviously inspired by Starship Troopers, even bits of the Warhammer 40k universe, and a lot of other sci-fi media, and it does them all justice. Meanwhile, not only does Payday 3 fumble being an homage to heist movies and other media, it somehow feels less like a heisting game than its own predecessors, Payday 2 and Payday the Heist. And I almost forgot the whole reason why I brought up this game. Helldivers 2 feels like a fun, complete game, but at the end of the day, it's still a live service game, with a battle pass and paid cosmetic DLC. And yet, somehow, it feels fair. You can find premium currency in regular gameplay, and there isn't hoops of shady pricing and bundles that you have to go through. In fact, it appears as if the devs have taken a hard stance against many of the monetization tactics that Payday 3 is more than willing to use. That's not even mentioning that the game has had more patches in a month than Payday 3 has had in 5 months. It's constantly being fixed and listening to player feedback and implementing new changes. As more time passes, Payday is going to struggle to keep its players as they look to other games that are willing to treat them right. Now, one of the big changes we can hope to expect from Payday 3 is a change to how pricing works. However, as I've tried to display in my points from this video, pricing is but one small fraction of the reason why Payday 3 failed. It's not just that prices are too high for the value they provide, but also that pricing is predatory, that upgrade paths have been taken away from people, and that the game itself does not have the same passion and features worthy of even a fair asking price. And also, what does this mean for people like me who have already bought the game and its DLC? Are we just out of luck? So while it's good that the devs are aware that pricing is a sore point for the game, I think it's best to remain skeptical about pricing changes until they're set in stone. I feel like people often forget how Payday has betrayed people's trust multiple times now, like when they added microtransactions after explicitly saying they wouldn't. I hope that in the future, the pricing becomes more transparent and fair, and as well as just being more reasonable. Of the games I mentioned, for Halo Infinite and Warhammer Darktide, these games took a really long time before they became better, and I concede, they still have lots of areas that can be improved. I mean, speaking from experience, I've been on Fat Shark's wild ride before, and I know how those devs can go completely silent for months, and the games they work on, they can go on the biggest content droughts, which kind of makes it all the more amazing that they managed to make Darktide better, if you ask me. But the one thing that all of these comeback games share is that, had they been like this from the start, a fuller, more complete, more polished game, they'd undoubtedly be way more successful than they are now. They're going to have to live with the fact that they missed an opportunity, that they might have had a chance to become the next big thing. This is something Helldivers 2 is showing great promise in, by feeling like a full game with attention to detail, fair monetization, and lots of work on updates and communication from the devs. Now, what about Payday 3? Well, after the devs' recent announcement with Operation Medic Bag, talking about all the things they hope to change for the future, there is some hope that the game can turn it around. But in order to do that, they're going to have to make some big changes to how they handle updates and content. Because so far, I believe this is a big contributing factor for the reason why Payday 3 failed. If simply getting content was enough for players, more people should have been happy to get some updates. But that's clearly not the case. To illustrate my points, there are a few things that we need to be familiar with before I continue. First is the DLC roadmap, laid out by the developers. This DLC roadmap covers the first year of paid DLC planned for the game. It's also important to note that this roadmap was created well before Payday 3 was released. Second, Payday 3 is marketed and sold as a live service game, otherwise known as the Games as a Service model. For those unaware, this is providing a game to players while continuously monetizing it, either through subscriptions, seasonal passes, battle passes, or microtransactions. The caveat being that in order to keep the consumer happy, these games will often have to continuously update the game and add content in order to incentivize players to keep spending money. Now let's go back and take a look at the DLC roadmap. This was released before Payday 3 even came out, and that already was a big red flag for a number of reasons. So one DLC is planned to release for every quarter for the first year, the first one being in Q4. However, as many of us are well aware by now, Payday 3 is a game that is lacking many things, including content and basic functionality. Being able to unready in a lobby, loadout switching actually working while in the pregame lobby, no voice chat in-game, text chat only working for the PC version, no server browser or matchmaking filters. These are all things players have been asking for since the very first week the game has been released. As of February 2024, we finally have official news from the devs that they are aware that players want these things and that they're important to the player experience. However, past updates haven't given me confidence for future implementations of these changes. Not yet, anyway. Let me explain why. So far, there has only really been 3 substantial updates for this game. The first update, which had incredibly hefty delays, was there mostly to fix various bugs. The only real memorable part of it was fixing the weapon EXP exploit from 99 boxes. The second update that came out 2 months after the game's release was the Legacy Heist update, which proclaimed to be one of the biggest updates ever. However, besides the content additions, which consisted of 2 old Payday 2 heists and the Transporter skill tree, again the only real notable changes were adding small EXP rewards for completing heists as a fix for the awful challenge system, a recommended challenges screen that barely shows up anywhere in the game, and some first-person animations. Now you have to understand, I'm not trying to undermine the fixes added from these updates, but it's clear that the game was still largely the same as it was during release. Any attempts at changes have been very surface level at best. Take the leveling changes, for example. Yeah, the game added EXP for completing heists, but it was not substantial, and it did nothing to change how the challenge system itself worked. It's still heavily skewed toward playing loud, it's still more efficient to sit in bathrooms and farm kills, and there has been no quality of life that improved that system at all. The recommended challenges screen that I said was added? That only shows up in the main menu, and nowhere else. And it doesn't even work well. It still shows me challenges that are either bugged or ones that I've already completed. Meanwhile, their 12-year-old game, Payday the Heist, has challenges show up in the game, in the tab screen, and as a pop-up when completed. There's also a lot of other changes from these updates that just exemplify the lack of actual depth. My favorite being a 300% HP boost to friendly AI to make them better, but they still won't revive each other when they go down. Now, one of the best pieces of news from Operation Medic Bag is completely doing away with challenges altogether. We're finally moving away from that awful system, and that brings me nothing but joy. However, I still hold reservations for many of the other changes. For example, loadout renaming. Yeah, being able to rename a loadout is nice, but does that mean we'll also get a better way to handle changing loadouts instead of scrolling through the bar one at a time? Will loadout switching actually work in the pregame lobby? And if we want to change our loadout on the fly, will we be able to access our entire inventory? Because right now it's broken and it doesn't seem to do so. The proposed changes from the devs are promising ones, but just as important as the changes itself is the implementation of it. If these additions are going to be done halfway, like how previous changes are, then these proposed changes would do very little to actually fix how the game is now. I also neglected to mention that most of the proposed changes in Operation Medic Bag have no planned future release. It's mostly a roadmap without any dates. However, the last section proposes changes like quick play, an unready button, vote kick, loadout renaming. That is speculated to finish by summer of 2024. As of making this video, the latest news from the devs say that they hope features like controller improvements and the unready button will be released somewhere in late February or early March of 2024. If these improvements can come out in a timely fashion, then maybe Operation Medic Bag is actually a somewhat promising initiative. But the devs are really gonna have to stick to it. Otherwise, instead, this roadmap looks a lot more like a drip feed, not of content, but of quality of life and basic functionality. Because summer of 2024 would be roughly 7 or 8 months after Payday 3's release, and only then can we expect to have quick play, unreadying, vote kick, loadout renaming, voice chat in the game? Don't forget, we still have the planned DLC to think of. Syntax Error came out in Q4 of 2023, and we're already well underway in Q1 of 2024. It's very possible that we're getting another paid DLC before most of these small quality of life features hit the game. This isn't even mentioning the actual important features that are needed, like the change to the progression system. Who knows how long that'll take before it comes out. It's already really sad that the first update containing an unready button and the bare minimum fixes so that controllers can function properly is being treated like it's a big major update. So it remains to be seen if the devs will be able to give us these improvements without spreading them out so thin. Now, going back to the updates, we talked about the first patch and the second patch, the Legacy Heist update. As a reminder, the Legacy Heist update took a little over 2 months after release to come out. After that second patch, only a short 2 weeks later, the Syntax Error paid DLC comes out, which added a heist, some weapons, and some skins. However, the update itself didn't address any of the game's issues and was purely a content update. Now, to me, I see a big problem. The time frame of the release was quite quick after the other update, almost as if this was the main focus for the devs, while the Legacy Heist update was a scramble to hopefully address some issues and add some free content for the players. Now, I do understand that there was a critical back-end error that the devs found that could wipe player progression, but that has since been fixed since the start of November 2023, which was the date that the first update released. This, in conjunction with Operation Medic Bag's slow rollout of basic features, almost makes it seem as if the pre-planned DLC is the main focus of the game, and sticking to the DLC roadmap is much more important than working to improve the game. Just to remind you, it took over 4.5 months before the devs released their Operation Medic Bag plan. And to reiterate, yes, the proposed changes are great. They're things we can all agree that the game needs. But these are also things we've been asking for since the game's release. I know that the devs probably have their hands full trying to balance adding content and fixing the game, but it seems like that scale is tipped in favor of using development time and resources for paid DLC. For a weirdly specific example on the roadmap, the devs said that they wanted to do seasonal events. We passed by one of the biggest seasonal events of the year, the entire holiday season of December, one of the most popular times for other games to do events. Payday 2 even had seasonal events, to an extent. But the only thing that came out during that time for Payday 3 was the Syntax Error DLC. Now, I'm well aware that asking for seasonal content is pretty dumb, considering how much work and content elsewhere is needed in the game. But would it have been so hard to just have like double EXP for a short while, or maybe a Santa hat mask like we got in Payday 2, just to let us know that, it's something on the table for the game? I have to stress again, I know this specific example passes the line of entitlement, at least to me. But this, along with the game's general treatment, just shows to me that the devs' priorities aren't in providing what I would consider to be fairly normal things for a games as a service. Almost all of their attention seems to be focused on the paid DLC roadmap. Unfortunately, even Operation Medic Bag sort of enforces this. I briefly mentioned this in my previous video covering Operation Medic Bag, but it's also been somewhat confirmed as of the last AMA, as well as their latest announcement. The only content that the devs are able to promise outside of paid DLC is one heist and one LMG, and that's for the foreseeable future, so possibly until at least Q3 of 2024. That's possibly 7 months. So the only free content Payday 3 will be receiving for the first year is 2 old Payday 2 heists, 1 future unannounced heist, and 1 future weapon. That's rough. I mean, let's take a look at all the DLC that came out for Payday 2 in the first year. And of those, I've gone and highlighted all of the free heists. Let's just put aside any of the other stuff for now. I understand that Payday 2's early development cycle was not sustainable. The devs even said themselves that they were overworked to hell for that time period. But the message was clear that there was a good mix of paid and free content. Payday 3 is so heavily skewed toward the paid content, and half of the free content isn't even really technically new. I think Payday 2 did it right, where most of the stuff in the early years was just completely new, and only later down the line did they start remaking old heists and adding it back as content. So for anyone that was hoping that Payday 3 would be better if they just left it for a year or two and then came back, it's starting to look like that won't be the case, because if you're not willing to be a big spender, the game doesn't look like it'll be changing that much. I also want to take a closer look at the Syntax Error DLC specifically. It shows signs of misguided priorities. For example, looking at the heist, for some reason, no new animations were given to certain interactables of the heist, like putting down the cable ladder, or using the lever to turn off the lasers in stealth. And, that's not something I'd normally be fussed about, but when looking at the weapon DLC, for some reason, they made sure that each of those new weapons got their own separate exclusive inspect animations, while the rest of the base game guns use the same template animation? Why? Well, one can only speculate, but in other video games, inspecting guns is a great way to show off skins that you have, maybe weapon stickers or charms. This justifies the purchase for the person using it, and they get to make other people that see it green with envy. If you're a content creator or a professional player, it's a great way to show off DLC guns or weapon skins, making those that see it just that much more likely to try and spend some money too. Like those Counter-Strike players that always have to inspect their knives every chance they get, and it costs them like $1,000. It's a working formula. Hate the game, not the player. But such a thing just highlights to me that perhaps they prioritize their animators to make these weapon inspect animations, and thus, heist animations took a backseat. I know that, again, this is pretty nitpicky. Perhaps the devs really did just forget. But when enough of these small, nitpicky things start piling up, they start to form a pattern. But GeneralMcBadass, one of the problems this game has is the lack of content. So surely focusing on content with DLC and weapons and skill trees is not a bad thing, right? Well, the prices of the DLC aside, I suppose that's not entirely incorrect. The issue here is what that content actually is. I mentioned it earlier in this video, and I also have a whole video dedicated to reviewing syntax error, but nothing in the new DLC really seems like it added something new or unique to the game, and this includes the free content such as the skill trees. The implementation of the DLC roadmap brings up an interesting conundrum. There's a pretty popular theory out there that most games that have pre-order DLC, or in this case, a year of pre-planned DLC, these games aren't releasing what is intended to be the full and complete game at release, while then updating the game down the line with new content. Instead, these games are simply taking what was supposed to be the full and complete game, chopping it up into pieces, and then selling the parts as the base game, the pre-order DLC, or future DLC. Now, we'd all love to believe that this isn't the case, but Payday 3 has not made a very compelling argument. The base game feels lacking in content when the 8 heists that it has are fairly basic, very linear, reuse a lot of the same objectives, and they just don't have a lot of replayability. The syntax error DLC heist also has a lot of those same traits. It doesn't have any new ideas, and it doesn't have a lot of replayability. Let's also take a look at the syntax error DLC weapon pack. The base game has a pretty apparent lack of variety for its weapons. Meanwhile, what's included in the syntax DLC weapon pack is a straight up power creep SMG, it's better than all the other SMGs currently in the game, a single shot DMR rifle, and a semi-auto shotgun. Now, looking specifically at the shotgun, this weapon feels very much like it could have been cut content. Why? Well, the base game of Payday 3 has only 2 shotguns, a pump-action shotgun and a double-barrel shotgun. Meanwhile, Payday 2, at its release, had a pump-action shotgun, a double-barrel shotgun, and a semi-auto shotgun, if we're only counting the primaries. It feels unheard of for a sequel game to actually have less content variety than its prior game. Even the DMR might be a part of this. For some reason, Payday 3 won't allow you to change the firing mode of assault rifles, like going from semi-auto to full auto. This, again, is a mechanic that was present in Payday 2, though admittedly I don't think this was present in the base game, but it was there for a darn long time. I know that one of the very first Gauge DLC packs added single and auto-fire mods, but those were different. I'm talking about a weapon's inherent ability to switch firing modes. In any case, this is yet another mechanic that no longer exists, and conveniently, the new DMR feels like a regular assault rifle, but in single fire only. Is this all just coincidence? Maybe. The problem here is that after seeing so many anti-consumer practices being added to the game, is it so far-fetched to believe that content is being cut and sold as DLC? I understand that it's not inherently bad for a game to have a content pipeline already planned out, and not only do most games do this, but also many games don't suffer because of it. To me, the bigger issue here is that people aren't exactly going to be happy to see much needed content variety and replayability locked behind a DLC paywall, when the base game is suffering, and at times it even feels like said content could have originally been part of the base game. Now, that kind of stuff only works when the game already has a good foundation to work on. Additionally, some of the new content for the game, either ones they've already added or are proposing to add, they don't exactly fix some of the core issues with Payday 3. Let's focus on the skill trees, because let's be real, outside of that one free heist and one free LMG, skill trees are probably the only real content that we're getting. The skill tree additions so far have mainly followed the concept of this mechanic is bad in Payday 3, so here's a skill tree to make it better. Well, that's fine and dandy and all, I guess, but we already have a limited amount of skill points to use, and now instead of rebalancing stuff to make it better, you want to release skill trees that we have to invest in order to make up for poor mechanics or poor balance? In Payday 2, the skill system was more or less fleshed out, and it had good build crafting and skill variety, and it offered a lot of fun power fantasy for many players, even if it was a bit crazy at times. And then the perk decks, they were the cherry on top, adding new playstyles and allowing players to try new things and new synergies. But this all hinges on having a complete system, and Payday 3 does not have that. The skills and skill building in Payday 3 are all rather boring. all contingent on the same edge, grit, and rush buffs. And balance is also heavily skewed toward a few things, like the armor system. It doesn't leave a lot of room for creativity. The skill tree that came out with the Syntax Error update, Scrambler. This one focuses on making tools better, specifically ECMs. But they still have very limited functionality, and they aren't fun to use. In one of the latest dev streams, it was also proposed that a new skill tree, Fortitude. This time, it would attempt to make medic bags and healing more worth using, as well as adding an overheal mechanic. Like, sure, that could be neat, but that doesn't solve the core issue. It sounds like I could drop my armor skills, switch to this new skill tree and use medic bags, but now I'm doing the same thing that I was doing before. I would have hoped that skill trees would be fun, unique, or maybe introduce different playstyles, but so far, that hasn't been the case. And one of the things that stands out to me, at least for the skills, is just how many of these skills and skill trees have Payday 2 stuff in them. This is basically ECM feedback. This is 9 lives. This tree is probably based on the old Ghost Silencer skills, and the entirety of the Transporter skill tree originated from one of Payday 2's oldest and most popular mods, Carry Stacker. Now the point I'm trying to make here isn't whether these skills are good or bad, or that they're not wanted. Like, yeah, the Transporter tree is really damn good. I'd wager most people always wanted something like that, hence the original mod's popularity. But the issue here is that these skill trees aren't all that creative. They aren't making me go, wow, I really want to try that. I'm gonna boot up my game and play around with it and see how it interacts with different builds. Like I mentioned earlier, at most, I'll swap some skills and use a different thing or two, but now I'm playing almost the exact same way. There's a fundamental flaw in the Payday 3 skill system, and from my perspective, it's boring and restrictive at the same time. Also, despite the game wanting to be different from Payday 2, and clearly being designed so, it's funny that we still end up getting lots of skills and mechanics that are straight from Payday 2. Even the newest proposed armor is going this route. It's called Adaptive Armor, or as I like to call it, the we fucked up on Payday 3's armor system, but we don't want to backtrack on it, so here's a new armor that's kind of like Payday 2's, but kind of not. In essence, this is a new armor that they're planning to add to the game that still has armor chunks, but as long as your chunks aren't completely broken, they'll be able to regenerate as long as you don't get shot, like Payday 2 armor. Like, at some point, they're just gonna have to admit that they screwed up Payday 3, but I think keeping the majority of Payday 3's core mechanics, while drip-feeding skills and mechanics from Payday 2, is only gonna lead to a downright mess. So is all future content just going down this weird route? It really brings up the question as to what the direction of this game is supposed to be. Now, I realize that what people find fun and exciting is highly subjective. Perhaps there are people out there that appreciate getting content like this. But if we look at this logically, the people that enjoy content like this would be the same people that enjoy the game as it currently is. Skill system, mechanics, all of it. And judging from the amount of players still playing the game, that isn't very many. These additions aren't inherently bad, but one of the sore points for a lot of Payday players is that the core mechanics themselves are not very fun. The skill system and build crafting is very lackluster. The new armor system is uninspired and severely slows down the game. These new skills, skill trees, and the new armor, they're not going to change that. It feels like the devs are stuck using the same formula of updates and DLC as they did for Payday 2, but while it may have worked on that game, it isn't working for Payday 3. The game is different, times are different, and this complacency in the game's treatment is starting to become quite apparent. I believe that the type of content being added to the game isn't the type that it needs, and that's pertinent to the reason why Payday 3 is a game that continues to do poorly despite getting updates. So to summarize, the reason why Payday 3 failed is because the game's prices are expensive and predatory, the devs appear to be prioritizing paid DLC over fixing the game, and content being added to the game can feel more like cut content rather than being new or meaningful additions. Now, I get that the last few points I made are just my opinions. Maybe you don't agree and you think I'm way off the mark. But at the very least, I think there's some undeniable truths present. The pricing and monetization is without a doubt greedy and predatory, and updates fixing the game with changes or quality of life are nearly non-existent, giving the impression that the only reason why Payday 3 is a games as a service or a live service game is simply because it wanted to sell more DLC, and nothing more. This notion is starting to change with Operation Medic Bag, but even then, there's still one thing I have to say about this. Actions speak louder than words, and so far, this game has been characterized by inaction. It was mentioned before on streams and such that the devs were looking to fix the game. And then they dropped the bomb on us that 4.5 months later, that was never the case. They're only starting to work on changes now, after the game is already dead. Operation Medic Bag proposes a lot of change, but this is only just a roadmap of adding basic features and functionality. It's hard to believe anyone would be excited for such a grand announcement of things that should already be in the game. Greed is a hell of a drug, and Payday was knee-deep in it, possibly still is. Payday 3 could have been huge. Payday the Heist was a cult classic, small but it had a dedicated following. And Payday 2 was vastly different from the first game. It added so many new weapons, an entire skill system, stealth mechanics, and despite constant setbacks, despite backlash over things like adding microtransactions when they said they wouldn't, and charging for DLC after they said they wouldn't anymore, the game still succeeded. It not only succeeded, it thrived. It was truly lightning in a bottle. But instead of taking all those experiences and learning from it, instead of figuring out what was good about those games and building upon it, we got, well, whatever the heck Payday 3 is, and I don't understand it. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't understand what it is to make a game. You know, I've done my research and I've learned what I could, but ultimately, I'm just not a part of that world. But like the majority of people in the world that also own and drive a car, they don't have to understand how it's made or what the car industry is like to be able to know if a car is good. If it doesn't have the features they want, if it falls below expectations in performance, if the price to buy and maintain is too high, then their complaints are valid. It's not like this video has some amazing revelations or insider info nobody's ever heard about that gives insight on why the game is the way it is. These are just deductions based on my observations that I've made about the game's prices, the various actions the game has made, and statements made from the devs. Supporters of Payday 3 say that I'm too cynical and negative, but am I really? Honestly, I think I'm being pretty real with all this. I'll give props when it's due, like how I've praised the new stealth mechanics, or how the changes to cook-off were really intuitive, and I think it's a much better heist now. Really, this is just the truth, and rather than accept it, I think a lot of people would rather avert their eyes to the problem. As a paying customer, I don't believe this game deserves any praise, simply for being updated or adding content to it. It wouldn't solve anything. I mean, I could lie through my teeth and say that Payday 3 is the best game I've ever played, it's an absolute gem that needs polishing, it's getting updates and content, and that's commendable. In fact, the last update was absolutely massive, it changed everything. The newest DLC is the best I've ever played, but oh, tisk tisk, if only it weren't for that pesky price. And now Operation Medic Bag is perfect, and it's gonna bring everyone back to the game. Saying such things only hurts the game. Maybe it would improve my relationship with the devs, but they would not be my real opinions. There's one thing we need to remember here. These game companies, they're not your friends. And even I had to learn this the hard way. It doesn't matter if you've been supporting the game for over 10 years. You're not invited when they do their big 10-year anniversary where they contacted a whole host of other content creators. When you contact them about the new partner program, they kind of deny you, but not really. So instead they kind of ghost you, which in hindsight was probably a blessing in disguise. Look, I know I'm being petty, but this is just how it is now. And it's not like I don't appreciate what they've done for me in the past, being Overkill approved, shoutouts in the Yakuza trailer and the Diamond Heist, and meeting the devs and voice actors in that first Payday Con in Seattle. That's something I'll cherish forever. But things change. I mean, the last time Starbreeze went out of their way to contact me, that wasn't just a promotion for another game, it wasn't even actually because of me. They just wanted to make sure I replied to H3H3. I've only ever told a few people this. A friend of mine said that I should take this to my grave if I ever wanted the opportunity to work with this game or company again. But it seems like I already lost that chance long ago, and committing to this video seals the deal, regardless of any of the things I said just now. But ignoring all that, that's not to say that all game companies are just greedy and that they can't be good or respected. At the end of the day, these companies have one goal: to make money. How they make that money? Well, some will do it through providing valuable content. others through focusing on other things. Payday has always been aggressive with monetization, but at the very least, in the distant past, it still felt like they cared about providing value and content. However, in the present day, the devs have been ruining their own reputation, and the game is clearly suffering as well. The thing about goodwill and reputation is that it's earned. In this case, the only way to get that back is to improve the game and provide content for it that goes beyond the scope of quarterly profits. Operation Medic Bag is a hopeful look into the future, but the devs have to stick by it. They have to get rid of challenges, they have to make prices lower and more fair, and they have to actually add the things like voice chat and the other improvements. If they drip feed us the quality of life updates and keep focusing on monetized DLCs, well, that's just not the type of thing that's going to save this game. Do I think Payday 3 can turn it around? Well, all I know is that if Payday 3 wants to continue shooting itself in the foot, all it needs to do is continue as it has been. If the game is going to keep focusing on releasing DLC before basic features and functionality are added to the game, it would be digging your own grave. The devs also mentioned that they're pushing back the release of the in-game microtransaction store, and maybe it'll work, and the game will be better by then, and people will have forgotten all about the pain and outrage. But if this game hasn't improved enough and they still release it, that's going to be quite an exciting time. As I said before, actions are what speak louder than words, and so far this game is characterized by inaction. For a live service game, we are almost 5 months in and very little has changed. Almost nothing has been improved. Only now are we finally getting some confirmation that change is in the works, but it's only an announcement of a roadmap. Unfortunately, it may be too little too late. Payday 3 is already on track to being forgotten by the rest of the world, leaving behind only a legacy of disappointment and greed. If Payday 3 is to make a comeback, it needs to actually take action. It needs to follow these Operation Medic Bag improvements, and if you ask me, it also needs some big, huge, sweeping changes. After over 200 dreadful hours spent working on this game, it's pretty clear to me that the problem of Payday 3 isn't just that it had a botched release. It isn't just that it needs more content. I think it needs something else entirely. Builds and skills, they need to go back to being diverse and creative, not simply additions existing to make a weak mechanic a little better. Having skills be based entirely around edge, grit, and rush, that was probably a mistake and needs to be revamped. Give weapons unique mods again. Right now, they're all the same, and modding is one of the most boring things in the game. It was something I originally thought was okay, but the more weapons I unlocked and the more I leveled them up, I realized that almost every weapon has the exact same set of mods, both visually and mechanically. And the act of modding guns right now, it just feels totally meaningless. Modding doesn't do enough to change how a gun feels, whereas in Payday 2, modding could make the exact same weapon feel completely different. For new heists and maps, they need a new design philosophy. There needs to be an additional element of replayability so that they don't get boring after playing it only 2 or 3 times. Add back RNG elements like different spawn locations, maybe even add back special events. Perhaps this is also nitpicky, but I'd love for heists to actually feel like heists again. Dedicated servers, they need to be looked at. Perhaps this is a part of the menu UI revamp that were promised, but right now, this part of the game is very lackluster. Things don't update in real time, like when you buy C-stacks or swap weapons in your loadout. I get massive stutters in-game still, that's not based on my hardware or mods. And maybe this is just me being entitled, but to find a game for myself on invite only when nobody is playing the game right now, it still takes roughly 40 to 55 seconds. I literally time myself queuing into 10 different games. Solo mode and offline mode can't come soon enough for me. Of course, in the past I would have also said that the challenge system and the way the game is monetized through its pricing, that also needs to change, but both of these are a part of Operation Medic Bag's proposed changes, so hopefully they will be meaningful changes, and we can have a few less things about this game to worry about. Fixing the game with quality of life needs to be the #1 priority, not just an afterthought. But let's be real, even if the devs were able to add all of the quality of life improvements that we want tomorrow, like offline mode, progression changes, and they were perfect, it probably wouldn't actually bring that many players back to the game. At least I don't think so. But it would go miles in improving the devs' reputation and earn back some of that goodwill that they've lost. Payday 2 was joked and memed to death about being a dead game. But with Payday 3, it isn't actually a joke anymore. This is real. Barely anyone plays. You can't find populated lobbies. The game is dead. Well, Payday 3 is anyway. Payday 2 is still doing pretty well by all accounts. And maybe that's why the devs and the publisher, they don't seem to be pressured at all. But if you ask me, the day that the devs and the publisher go back to creating and selling DLC for Payday 2 is the day that Payday dies. And I don't mean financially, or from the company's perspective. On the contrary, I have no doubt in my mind that Payday 2 DLC would sell very well, even today. There's a good amount of people out there that don't really care about the things that I talked about in this video, or whatever greedy things the developers and publishers may or may not have done. At the end of the day, Payday 2 is, objectively speaking, the better game, and most people would be thrilled to see it get more content or updates. But no, the day we get Payday 2 DLC again is the day the franchise loses any shred of integrity it may have had left. I will have officially lost all respect for Payday. What sucks is that if Payday 3 doesn't pan out after the promised roadmap for the first year, I can see this being a very real future. Inevitably, one of the topics that comes up anytime a game is doing poorly like this is just who is to blame? Can we point a finger and say, if we get rid of them, the game will instantly improve? Of course, many Payday fans will use the publisher as the scapegoat, just like crossplay or console were previously used as the reason why updates were so infrequent. And fair enough, the publisher probably has a big hand in how monetization and pricing is handled for the game. But let's be real here, even the greediest of publishers still want the game to be good. At the end of the day, it still has to sell. I doubt they decided it would be best to have a boring, centralized skill system, or completely destroying the melee system, or Heist having no replayability and copy-paste boring objectives like hacking the Wi-Fi circles, or any of the other game-centric decisions. You know, there's an old saying that I'm probably gonna butcher, but if you go out and meet an asshole, they're an asshole. But if you go out and everyone is an asshole, then you're the asshole. Overkill's The Walking Dead, Payday 3, or the various other projects and investments that this company has ever done, what do they all have in common? Just food for thought. It's just so hard to fathom just how many bad choices and questionable decisions that this game has made. When I made my first review video of Payday 3, people were telling me I was too negative, that I needed to take a break and just come back to the game later. Since then, I've been playing other games, and rather than me coming back and realizing that the game was secretly good or something, it only enforced all the bad things about Payday 3. The pricing, the gameplay, everything. I mean, hell, I wanted to say this earlier, but I couldn't find a point to do so, but does anyone remember those Nebula accounts that you had to make and sign into just to be able to play Payday 3? It made a lot of noise when the game first came out, but now probably nobody remembers it. People were either against it or defending it, saying it was necessary for crossplay and a centralized progression system. Yet when I booted up both Warhammer Darktide and Helldivers 2 for the first time, both of these games have crossplay, and both of those games don't require me to make some stupid account to log in. Just going in from Steam was fine. No need to link my Microsoft or Sony accounts either. Crossplay just worked. Now, as far as I can tell, the only reason why Starbreeze wanted you to make a Nebula account was so they could get your email information and then try to send you advertisements. To speak nothing of the privacy concerns of giving yet another company your email and information. Well, anyway, I think I've covered most everything I wanted to. I know, this is a really long video. I wasn't even sure if I should make it. As you can probably see, I had some parts of it recorded as early as December 2023. But I wanted to make sure I got my stuff right, get my facts to back up my claims, or maybe even wait to see if the game would turn it around and prove me wrong. But that never came. I ended up taking a really long time to make this video, with constant edits and changes to my thoughts. In fact, I straight up remade this entire video like once or twice now. And that's why it took so long to come out. And it totally wasn't because I was purging heretics or spreading managed democracy. Unfortunately, I'm not terribly optimistic. Operation Medic Bag doesn't give me the confidence that it's gonna provide the things that are needed to keep the game alive. For me, I think this video is really just a big catharsis. There's so many things in here that I've wanted to talk about for a while. The pricing, the predatory monetization, the game being mediocre, my relationship with the devs, all of it. This video needed to be made, even if only to get it all off my shoulders. And I'm not sure if people are really gonna see this. I mean, my channel is not doing well. It's dying or is already dead. Outside of getting lucky once in a while with the algorithm, with a nice clickbaity title or thumbnail, the majority of my subs just don't watch my videos. My name being forever tied to Payday is also something to take into account. So I don't know what's gonna happen with Payday 3. Hell, I don't even know what's gonna happen to my own channel. I might try to chug along, whether it's with Payday or with other games, but it's hard to keep up these days, and it might just be time for me to move on. Goodbye, everyone.